Rays. I usually don't notice much about the temperature outside, but when I got here yesterday, may not be quite as humid as in Florida, but it was a little bit of a cooker. So, but we look forward to being able to go out and make an announcement today, hearing from y'all. Please have a seat. Thank you. Make yourself comfortable. I want to thank Chip Roy, not just for the great introduction and for his great support, but for what he does for our country. He is a ferocious defender of the people of Texas, of the United States, and of the cause of freedom. And the country's much better off with him holding the fort up in Washington, D.C. And we're gonna be able to do a lot more in about 18 months. Look, I look at the issue of the border, and there's some people in the media, some people on certain political persuasions that just dismiss it as kind of a Texas problem or an Arizona problem. But I'm here to tell you, when you don't have control of your own border, that's an American problem. And it's not just about, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on here. Hopefully we'll hear some stories today. But this impacts communities all throughout this country. And I can tell you it impacts Florida because we, like every single state in this country, have seen an increase in fentanyl overdose deaths over these last 3 or 4 years, but particularly over the last 2 years. And that means that these are mothers that are losing kids as a result of what's being brought across the border. Obviously, you guys see it the most, which is the sheer number of people. But even in communities far away from here, you have thousands of illegal aliens that will show up. What does that do for medical care? What does that do for education? What does that do for criminal justice? All these different things that it imposes serious burdens on community when you don't have control over who's coming in and out of your country. And nobody knows who's coming in. When I was here, so we've sent people to Texas on 2 occasions. We did in 2021 with the initial Biden surge because of his failed policies. And I went down there, and people act like it's people coming, that these are Mexicans coming in. I didn't see a single Mexican coming in, but there were people from halfway around the world coming through on this southern border because they know all you got to do is show up on the border and you're going to get a ticket to come into the interior of the United States. There were people I was reading from Tajikistan coming to the southern border. I remember seeing Libya. They now have, I think they've identified about 10,000 Chinese nationals coming across the southern border. Our own government acknowledges that you've had a significant number of people on its own terrorist watch list that have come across the border, and we know there have been a lot of criminal aliens that have come across the border. So this is a huge problem. We're going to do something about it. In terms of some of the cost of this, though, we've done a lot in Florida. One of the things we did, I have a tool in Florida where I can ask the state Supreme Court to impanel what's called a statewide grand jury. And basically, it's a grand jury that has wide investigatory power. It can do criminal indictments and things like that, but even short of that, it can subpoena, it can get documents, and it can issue reports. And so we did one about illegal immigration, and particularly about people being brought into the state of Florida, because a lot of this stuff is coordinated with non-governmental organizations and other types of people that are basically working in concert to evade immigration laws. And they were able to get a lot of evidence. They produced some reports. They're going to do more. But one of the things that I think was most shocking about this is how these children are being treated. So what you will say is, if you're just like an adult male, and you try to come across, your chance of staying is less than if you have a kid in tow. And so what they do is they identified a bunch of examples of this, but there's just one example. There was a lady from, I think, Honduras. She had 4 kids, and she wanted to come, to the United States. And there were these other men who wanted to come to the United States. All of them had been deported at least once, some multiple times. She rented out her kids to these adult males. And then they all went across the border, and because there was a kid, it was fake, that gave them a leg up to stand. So this is what our government is incentivizing, that type of conduct. Could you imagine possibly renting out your own kid to somebody who probably doesn't have great intentions coming into this country. So it's created, I think, a real human catastrophe because of what the government's doing. And in Florida, Chip mentioned we've taken action. We've done things like ban sanctuary cities. We have employment verification. If you bring people into the state illegally, you get stiff penalties now in the state of Florida, and it's having a huge impact. People know we're just going to do it legally. We're not going to mess with this, and that's positive. But one of the things we did, we're not a southern border state, but we are a maritime border state, and so it doesn't get as much fanfare, but we have people try to run illegally with boats into the Florida Keys in particular and other parts of South Florida. Haiti, the Bahamas, Cuba, you name it. And so this is the Coast Guard's responsibility to take care of this, and they do a good job, but they do not have enough resources to stop all the boats. And so we were in a situation where Coast Guard started dumping some people in the Florida Keys, and then you had some boats coming through. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. And so I declared a state of emergency. We surged all of our marine assets to fill the gaps where the Coast Guard wasn't able to do. And so what happens is you have a boat, maybe there'll be 15 Haitians on it coming illegally. You stop the boat, you bring the Haitians to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard deports them back to Haiti. And guess what happened once people saw that that was likely to be the result of them trying to enter illegally? The number of boats plummeted that were trying to even come in the first place. Why would you want to get into a ragtag vessel, go hundreds of miles potentially in very hostile waters sometimes, knowing that the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to go right back where you started from? People aren't going to do that. And the same principle applies here at the southern border. If they come and know what'll be happen is they'll get a sheet of paper saying come up for a court date in 3 years and just go enjoy the United States, well, then they're going to do that. If they come and if they're denied entry or if they're immediately repatriated, well, guess what? People are not going to want to mess with this. They're not going to pay some coyote thousands of dollars to be able to do it because they know the United States enforces its laws, and that's just the way it is. So we have to reestablish the rule of law in this country. We have to make sure that people understand that there is a sanction to violating the law. We also should just be very clear. Look, this whole thing about asylum, there are legitimate reasons why someone would need asylum, and there have been throughout American history. But what you're seeing now is an abuse of asylum. I mean, just think about it. If you're fleeing a country, what you're supposed to do is the first time you get to safety, you claim asylum wherever that is. Instead, we've got people coming from South America, traveling through all these other countries, showing up at our southern border, entering illegally, and then claiming asylum here. That's not the way it works. And I know Chip is working on dealing with this legislatively. We'll do it through executive action where we will not entertain those claims at the southern border. We'll make it very clear to people. We'll make it very clear that while we support the idea of bona fide asylum, 90+% of these cases are not legitimate, and it's being used to be able to shoehorn them into this country against the law. So we're going to definitely do that. And to the extent you have some that are adjudicated, people can wait in Mexico for that adjudication. You don't come to the interior of the country and get a free pass. It's a lot less appetizing to make a trip like that, knowing you don't qualify in the first place and you're going to have to wait on the other side of the border before you get a decision. You will see it dry up in terms of the number of people that will want to come. I also look around, so we have people in Florida now helping. I was down, at Eagle Pass yesterday. We did a boat tour. We did the helo. But we've got a lot of our guys. We've got some of our fish and wildlife folks who do a lot on the water. We got highway patrol. And so we've put a lot of people. We've got National Guard from the state of Florida. And we believe it's important. But what I think needs to happen is, if the federal government won't do its job, the states should be permitted to send people back. That is what you need to do. And right now, and look, there have been Supreme Court decisions, so it's not like this is just something that people are making up. basically they say, states can't intrude on the federal government's prerogative to enforce immigration because immigration's a federal issue, and so therefore what the feds say goes. And I don't know whether that's right or not, but if the feds have the responsibility to do immigration and they decide to just not do it, then are we just helpless and we don't have the laws enforced at all? And so I think the states have a role to play. I can tell you as president, we are going to fully deputize all state and local governments to be able to enforce immigration law. You will be able to have that authority. And we're not going to allow sanctuary jurisdictions to get away with it. I mean, you think about some of these places, cities, states, where they say, we refuse to cooperate with any type of immigration enforcement. So what'll happen is, you'll have somebody who's in the country illegally, they'll commit a serious crime, they'll serve a prison sentence. When they're done with their prison sentence, a state or a locality that's sanctuary will not notify ICE that they're getting out of prison, because if they do, ICE can take them and send them back. Instead, they release them back into the community. How is that something that's acceptable? It's not. So we're going to turn the screws on sanctuary jurisdictions. They get a lot of money. All these localities and states get a lot of money from the feds. They get grants. They get all that. We'll make sure to turn the screws so that it pays to follow the law and it doesn't pay to violate the law. And the thing, too, about this is, honestly, some of this sanctuary stuff they do is a lot of virtue signaling, right? I mean, they started doing it a lot under the Trump administration, and I think it was a way for them to say, oh, we're fighting the power, all this stuff. Well, I can tell you, we have a program to offer the transport to sanctuary jurisdictions. Martha's Vineyard actually had an office in its downtown that said nobody's illegal, everyone. Well, it was a refugee welcome center. I guess they've never actually served anyone there because they had 50 show up. And so think about towns down here in South Texas. If you just had 50 one day, that would be like a good day, right? And so you're in a situation where they get 50. This is one of the wealthiest enclaves in the entire world. They are a self-described sanctuary jurisdiction, and yet what did they do when they had 50 come and ask for services? They declared a state of emergency, and they kicked them off the island the next morning. So some of this stuff is, we have a country right now where we have elites that think that they should impose their vision on the rest of us, but they don't think they should have to suffer any of the consequences. I mean, can you imagine how they would feel if people were coming illegally, going through their yards in Martha's Vineyard, knocking on their windows at night? They would never tolerate that for a minute, and yet they expect you to down here because they want to impose their vision on others without having to live under the consequences of that. So that's just something that's very, very clear. Part of what we're going to do, of course, we talk about, building the wall. I was in Arizona the other day, and, you have like wall, then it just kind of stops. And so you have like the guy from the cartel just kind of hangs out where it stops, and he motions for people, to go over. And so like having just one piece, I mean, you got to finish the job, and there's a lot more you got to do on that. But even in places where there were really serious steel beams and everything, these guys in the cartels, they can cut through the really fortified steel beams. And I'm just thinking to myself, you spend all this money on that, and you just let them cut through with impunity and do it. And so, I think you need adequate rules of engagement so that, I mean, if someone was breaking into your house, you would repel them with the use of force, right? But yet if they have drugs, these backpacks, and they're going in and they're cutting through an enforced structure, we're just supposed to let them in? I say use force to repel them. If you do that one time, they will never do it again. So this is, and look, here's the thing with the drugs, I think, is you are seeing It's the #1 cause of death, fentanyl overdose, for people 18 to 49 right now in the United States of America. It shows no signs of abating, and it's going to continue to be a major issue. Now, you got to deal with the supply. It's not the only thing you have to deal with, but you have to deal with the supply. And so we're going to be leaning in against these drug cartels. I think that they are killing a lot of Americans. They are effectively in control of this border to begin with. And part of the reason it's gotten this way is they don't get any pushback. They're able to just do this with impunity. And so we will designate them either a transnational criminal organization, foreign terrorist organization. Chip and I are talking about. Bottom line is we're going to give them a designation so that we can unleash more federal power to be able to kneecap the cartels. And so that's going to happen. It's important. And I think about, you have so many people that are dying in the United States, and yet our ruling class in D.C., they're just shrugging their shoulders at this. You know, there's no sense of urgency to try to stop this. It's just kind of, for them, it's kind of the cost of doing business, I guess. And I just find that to be unacceptable. I find it to be totally deplorable. And the thing about it, and the reason why I'm motivated to really bring this issue to a conclusion, is because I have listened to people in D.C. for years and years and years, going back decades, Republicans and Democrats always chirping about this, and yet never actually bringing the issue to a conclusion, never actually getting the job done. And so what we're saying is no excuses on this. Get the job done, make it happen. We want results. We don't want hollow rhetoric. We don't want empty promises. And so when we go in on day one, we're going to marshal every bit of authority that we have. We'll work with Congress when we need to. We'll take executive action when we can. And it will be a day one priority. And you're going to see a big change very, very quickly. And so I'm looking forward to doing it. Final thing I'll just say is this, and I'll be happy to hear from some of y'all. You know, it's to me what I've seen at the border is just humiliating as a country that we can't even enforce the territorial integrity of this nation. You know, people fought and died so that we could be independent to begin with. They fought over so many different generations so that we can be free. And a free society means that your borders are enforced, that your borders matter. You know, I don't consider myself just some citizen of the world. I'm an American, and being an American needs to mean something. We're a distinct country with distinct borders, and it's very, very important that we understand that. And I just think about, you know, would we have ever allowed this to happen, like during like World War II or something like that? I mean, we would have, you know, squashed this very quickly if we had this many deaths coming from drugs. And it's like now in our current day and age, it's like our government can never do anything right, and they just let problems persist. And so we're going to bring, I think, a can-do spirit to this issue. You know, we had a hurricane that came through in September, almost a Category 5, Hurricane Ian. It did a lot of damage, but one of the things it did was it knocked out a bridge going from the mainland to Pine Island, and it knocked out a causeway going from the main island to Sanibel in 3 different locations. So it had 3 breaks. And these were not state roads or bridges, so it really wasn't directly under our purview. But the locals were being told, you're going to be out of luck for 6 months. You better get off the islands. You better just make arrangements because it's going to take a long time. So they came to me and they're like, hey, can you help us? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to help you, of course. And so I got my guys together and I said, listen, no red tape, no bureaucracy, and no excuses. I want these bridges fixed, and I'm not waiting 6 months for it. And so we mobilized, cut through all the smoke. We did the Pine Island Bridge. It didn't take months. We did it in 3 days. And then we did the Sanibel Causeway, fixed it in 3 different places 2 weeks after that. So don't tell me things can't be done. You just got to put your mind to it and make it happen. All right. Anybody have anything that they want to say? I want to hear from you. I'm happy to answer questions or just listen to you in terms of what you're doing with some of this. Do we have hands anywhere? Okay, sir. Thank you for your service.
My name is Gary Sapoff. Now, if we go through another country and we do what they're doing to us, they would declare war. The U.S. Constitution says if you are invaded by another country, that's an act of war. Why haven't we acted?
Well, I think we should act. I mean, I think that it's a violation of sovereignty. I think Chip and I view taking action that's very forward facing in terms of that, because it's violating our sovereignty and it's killing Americans. And so, of course, it's a violation. I think the state of Texas has a right to declare an invasion. I think states have a right to come in and help repel the invasion. Certainly, when I'm president, your state people here will be able to deport across the border 100%. But I think they should be doing that right now. So you're going to see, as president under Article 2 of the Constitution, you have a responsibility and a duty to protect the country. And we are going to do that, and we are going to do that robustly. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of us see and we get defeated. Sorry. Oh, I'm Kelly Pratt from Del Rio, Texas. A lot of us see what's going on in Washington, D.C., and we see the one-sidedness where they have rules for us and not for them, and nothing happens with the Republican Party. Nothing gets done. We can't get on the same page like the Democrats do. I mean, when they do something, they are all in it to win it. What are you going to do to bring the party together so we can get things done and clean up the mess and the corruption that's happening in D.C.?
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. But I think you're right about how D.C. looks out for itself. Here's an interesting fact. 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in this country are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Now, how does that happen? Are they producing energy or any of that? I mean, they're producing a lot of hot air from the nonsense they spew. They're producing a lot of debt for the rest of us. But if you look at something and how the federal government manages its finances, borrowing, printing, spending trillions and trillions of dollars, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years at levels nobody thought possible, that's been bad for everybody in this room, because you're paying way more for groceries, you're paying way more for necessities, and the inflation's really an invisible tax that hits you in the pocketbook every day. Now, it doesn't hit them as much. A lot of that has been beneficial to people that are politically connected or that are in Washington, D.C. And that's been true with Republicans and Democrats as well in D.C. I mean, it's not been only one party. And so we clearly can't just do business as usual. And I've said the country is in decline right now. I am not running because, like some Republicans, we just want to manage the decline a little bit better than the Democrats. No, I'm running to reverse the decline. I'm running to upend what's going on in Washington. And I can tell you, I have a track record of doing this in Florida. I came into office, Chip mentioned we won this historic landslide re-election. My state was a 1-point state when I got elected in 2018 the first time. We got elected with 32,000 votes. It wasn't 1.5 million the first time. So I came in. I didn't have super majorities in the legislature. I came in. I had to set the vision. I had to mobilize support behind that vision, and I had to deliver results. And so we were able to do that. And lo and behold, we attracted more people to our cause and ended up shattering all these records in 2022. So I think it's at the end of the day about leadership. I think people are going to be attracted to a very clear vision. And we governed in Florida with bold colors, not with pale pastels. Everybody knew where we stood. And, even people didn't like what we did, said, governor says what he means and means what he says. Another thing I think about me that people will say, even people that, have opposed us, is if he tells you he's going to do something, he is going to do it. He doesn't just say, there's not hollow promises. If I can't promise you something, I just won't do it. But if it's something that I believe in and I believe that I can get it done, and I tell you that, you can set your clock. We are going to act. And so on all this stuff, we are going to act. But I think it's just about leadership. I think it's about understanding that, you need to build as big a coalition as possible. And, look, I'm proud in my election. I had people vote for me who had voted for like Bernie Sanders in the past. Why? Because I did something to better their lives. Like when they were trying to force everyone to take vaxes, the COVID vaxes, we called a special session of the legislature and said, you do not have to choose between a shot you don't want and a job that you need. And we protected people's jobs because they didn't want to have to be faced with that choice. So I think we've shown an ability to have a really good agenda that appeals to a broad range of people. And when people see that, I think they get excited, and I think that they're going to want to get on board. So we'll be able to get it done. But, you know, one of the things I did in Florida, I helped other candidates. It wasn't just about me. I helped the legislative candidates. We now have supermajorities. We did not have that when I started. I've helped school board candidates. We elected 29 new conservative school board candidates throughout Florida. Because if you think about what they're doing now, they're trying to impose indoctrination and ideology in the schools. Who here would think that even 5 years ago, it would have been appropriate to have like transgender ideology in a first grade classroom, telling a girl that she may really be a boy or that she should change her gender? Totally unacceptable. So yeah, in Florida, we led to protect parents and kids from that, but you need the school board people on the front line. So we did that as well. And I think it's the same thing federally. You know, I'm going to be working to help members of Congress. I'm going to be working to help people get elected to the Senate because, you know, it's a team effort. At the end of the day, politics is a team effort. Yeah, there's a lot you can do through executive action. Some of this stuff we can do purely through executive action, and we will, but ultimately you need that strong support, and so we will provide that, you know, and if we do it half as good as we did in Florida, this country's going to be in great shape, I'll tell you that. Who else we got? Yes, ma'am. Right behind you.
Hi, Jacqueline Klein from San Antonio. Once you're elected, what tax plans do you intend to enact once you're president?
Lower taxes is what we want. So we're going to be rolling out some tax policy. I think clearly some of these current tax laws are about to expire in a couple years. That would raise everyone's taxes. We're not going to let that happen. We're going to make sure that we preserve. One of the things I think that we will do is, okay, your tax policy says something about what you think is important and maybe what you don't think is important. I think our tax policy, you know, these kind of information technology companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, you know, they do very well under this current system. But a lot of what they're doing is like entertainment. I mean, obviously with kids, I think they're on these devices way too much. I think it's been a huge negative there. We tend not to do as much in terms of favoring, you know, capital investment and advanced manufacturing and things like that. So I really want to reorient it. We need to make more things in this country. We can't have everything made in China like we've seen over the last however many years. And, you know, they used to say like, oh, well, some of these, you know, the cheap stuff, like if it's made in China too, you know, look, I think our manufacturing is probably not going to be that stuff. I think it's going to be more cutting edge. But even like this cheap stuff from China, you know, when my wife and I, we get our kids Christmas presents, and the stuff made in China breaks. It's like you can't even last 2 days after Christmas without the toys breaking. And so it's really, really cheap stuff. But I think for our national security, we can't be dependent on China for all these important things. I think it's important to have a strong industrial base just for our society and for economy. But also, if you ever were in a situation where you need to have a mobilization, if there was a major conflict that broke out in the world, what are you going to do? Go hat in hand to China to ask them to sell you more things so you can have more ammunition and stuff? That is not a good place to be in. And so clearly we're going to have tax policy that's going to be directed to recognizing that. And we're also going to reverse what Biden's doing with tax policy, try to subsidize electric vehicles and all these other things. Let people make a choice about what they want. Don't try to force everybody into that. And if you like it, there's a lot of people like it, knock yourself out. That's great. But he's trying to basically go all electric. And oh, by the way, if you do that, you're more dependent on China because you get a lot of the stuff to go into that from China. So that's not a good idea. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Turner, and I'm the founder of Texas Against Fentanyl. I lost my 19-year-old son to fentanyl poisoning. I think it's really important that we understand that as a nation, we're not tracking fentanyl deaths correctly. We need a COVID-like response, the amount of deaths, and there's no information coming from the top. And I would like to see that and improve. Well,
thank you for that, and I'm sorry to hear about your son. I think you're probably right that there's probably more that's going on. And I think one of the really dangerous things about the fentanyl is people can go and use something that, they maybe shouldn't be doing, but that would not typically be fatal. But if it's laced with fentanyl, all of a sudden, they could die. So we have to have an accurate accounting. Clearly, it's the #1 cause of death anyway, you count it for sure, but it's likely much more than that. I also would say, in terms of how we're going to approach this, yes, cartel, supply. Florida, we did huge penalties. Now, if you give to a minor and the minor dies, you're going to prison for life in the state of Florida. So and we got to do that. We got to do that, but I don't think you can do just through supply only. So what we've done in Florida is a couple things. One, try to reduce the demand. And what my wife, the First Lady of Florida, has done is she's done a campaign in schools called Your Facts, the Future, and she's educating high school kids about the dangers of substance abuse, but particularly drug use, with an emphasis on how, this is not like it was 40, 50 years ago with these street drugs. Not that it was good then, but now you never know, and it just takes a little bit of fentanyl. And so she's educating kids, and I think it does have an impact when they see that, because people don't want to take that risk. So that message has been put out to try to reduce demand. We also have leaned in on treatment for people, and we've had a program called the Coordinated Opioid Recovery Network. 17 counties in Florida. We're growing it, but basically it recognizes if somebody overdoses, goes to the hospital, they make it, and then they just get sent out of the hospital, chances are they're going to relapse. If there's nothing else that happens, chances are they're going to relapse. And so we now have an ability to get them in an integrated program. Sometimes they're getting, certain medical, sometimes they're getting counseling, whatever, to kind of get them so that they can cope with this. And what we found is people that have gone through that program, the relapse rate is under 10%. So that's a really big deal. So it's really a whole approach. And because I think some of the people that we've seen in Florida, who've overdosed and died from fentanyl, they had an addiction, they would get off, then they would go, and it was always kind of topsy-turvy, and then eventually, they had that fatal overdose. And so offering that, I think, is important. So from a federal perspective, we are going to work to counter demand, and we are going to work to help with treatment as in addition to the supply. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Woody Trotter, and I'm from Kenny County, and I'm very concerned about the children. I want to relate a story to you that a border patrolman told a woman that he was out in the bush, and this pregnant woman holding a 5-year-old child's hand approached him, and she said, "I think I'm in labor. Can you help me?" And he said, "Well, what do you want me to do with your little girl? She's not mine. I just found her out here." And I am concerned about these little children that are being abandoned by the cartel.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. And, we found it in Florida with the grand jury. I was talking about huge, heartbreaking stories about what's happening. And I think part of it is our policy here is incentivizing bringing children across the border. I would do just the opposite. I would say we are not going to be doing this. The children need to stay with their parents on the other side of the border. And once you just make that policy clear, it will stop happening. But right now, if you just have a child in tow, that's better than if you're trying to come by yourself illegally. And who are the victims? These kids are the victims. The cartels are abusing these kids. Some of them are ending up in being trafficked, being sex trafficked, all these really terrible things. And so you see really the worst of human nature coming through with some of this. But our policy has got to be, it is totally irresponsible to be shipping a child across an international border. That is not something that we want, and that's something that we have to try to prevent, because right now the incentive is just to do that, and I can't, it's interesting. We were in yesterday at Eagle Pass down there, right there in the river, and people had kind of mentioned, like, these folks like in Martha's Vineyard or in California, that raise a ruckus when they have however many people come, they act like somehow that was bad for the migrants. No. The migrants were thrilled to be able to get out of having nothing going for them. And what they pointed out to me is like, next time someone tries to say that, point them to, they call it like a PVC pipe graveyard. So you have people, and a lot of people that have drowned in the Rio Grande are now basically buried under these like PVC pipes is what now I didn't go see it, but just think about that. I mean, dozens and dozens of just corpses. How is that something that is good for policy? I mean, that's horrific that that's happening, and yet that is happening. Yes, sir.
My name's
Navy
Mauricio.
guy?
Yes, sir.
Thank you
Yes,
for your
sir.
service. Me too.
Absolutely. Well, my name's Mauricio Contreras. I'm from Sabinal, Texas. And piggybacking off what we said earlier, migrants come over here illegally. They think as soon as they step on the land of America, hey, give me a place to stay, give me some money, give me my medical care, hey, start giving me some money. But yet, our own backyard, homelessness, homeless vets, mentally, I mean, it's just one of these things that's constantly at me. I have three out of my 4 kids are in the military also. One's an Army officer, one's in a submarine, one's in Fort Sam Houston. It's just really gets to me. It's really passionate about me seeing that.
I agree with you. I mean, first of all, I think that if you want to incentivize illegal immigration, then offer them all the benefits, right? If you want to disincentivize, no taxpayer benefits. I mean, you know, that's not how it should be. You should just... And so we will act, you know, very quickly on that, but it's all about how you want to structure policy. And right now, the policy is structured to incentivize what's happening. We will turn that on its head, and there'll be a major disincentive to want to go. And you're right. It's like, you know, you go back like 100 years, 120 years, people would come. A lot of people were very poor back then. They would come, but there was no taxpayer programs. So if you came to America, you know, you had 2 nickels to rub together, like you better work, you better figure out what you're going to do, you better have a plan to make it. And actually, if you came to some place like Ellis Island and you were considered a public charge, they would send you back. They wouldn't even let you into this country if they thought you were going to somehow be a burden to the community or a burden to the state in any way. And I think that that's really, you know, the way it should be. Why would you want to say, come to America to get on programs? No, people have come legally to America not because they wanted to get on a program, it's because they wanted to live in freedom and they wanted to have an opportunity to do well. And that's what we've got to get back to in this country.
My name is Terry Flowers. I live in Del Rio, but we have some ties back to Midland and Odessa. Do you have plans to reinstate the Keystone Pipeline and put those people back in business, the jobs, the oil and gas industry? What's your plans?
100%, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a no-brainer. And, you know, the thing is, did you see they just had that crash in Montana? I think it was in Montana. The pipelines are the safest way to transport. I mean, it's better for the environment to have a pipeline than to do it on surface, 100%. And so Keystone, we want to permit a lot of pipelines. I mean, I think it's critical infrastructure. I think it's good for the economy, and I think it's good for our national security. We'll open up all the oil and gas in the United States for development because it's important. I mean, it's great for people's pocketbook to pay less for gasoline. And the thing is, you know, we see it at the gas pump, but it permeates everything in the economy. When energy prices are high, your utilities, your food, everything it permeates. So that's really good to get a downward pressure. Biden, he's kneecapping our ability to produce domestically. He says he wants no oil and gas in what? He said 5 or 10 years, which is absurd, but that's what they're trying to shoehorn, and this country will go into a depression if they get away with that. But what has he done? He's released all the strategic petroleum reserve. I mean, that's how he's tried to keep gas prices from going even a lot higher than they have. And so, God forbid something happens where we needed a whole bunch. He's basically depleted that. So I think it's a no-brainer. I think we'll be able to do that. But here's the thing: it takes forever to permit these pipelines. And the bureaucrats got to stop holding this country up. I'm sorry. We used to be able to build the Empire State Building. We could build the Golden Gate Bridge. That would take 25 years now from start to finish, probably, with all the bureaucracy and studies you need. You know, we need to cut through that red tape. We need to permit things like pipelines, put people to work, and enjoy the lower energy prices. Yes, ma'am.
you, Governor. My name is Veronica Caprosi. My daughter passed away of fentanyl poisoning. This isn't really a question, but more of a, sometimes fentanyl overdoses are not overdoses, they're poisonings.
Yep.
So can we start calling them what they are, a poisoning, and it's a murder?
Absolutely. And we're sorry to hear about your daughter. And, you know, unfortunately, I mean, we have two mothers. We probably even have more here. And it's, yes, I mean, look at this. That is an American tragedy that this is happening. And I can tell you, I mean, I go back 5-10 years, think about kind of who would come up to me, and then just in the last few, the number of mothers that I've met in similar circumstances. You know, these are awful circumstances, and so we've got to do something about it. But I agree with you. So in Florida, we treat it. So we did, you know what they do? They put the fentanyl in candy now to try to market it to young kids. And so we've said, you know, if you're doing it in a way that's marketing a young kid and that kid dies, you're going to prison for a life sentence. And we're going to treat you like the murderer that you are. And I think that should be true everywhere in this country. Because the toll is unacceptable, and we need to get to a point where it's not routine in every community in this country to be having mothers bury their kids because of this garbage. So we're with you on that 100%. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Enriqueta Diaz. There exists a federal law. There's a Form I-9 that by federal law requires that every employer must fill one of those for every employee to make sure that they're legal employees. There's no enforcement. Washington keeps passing laws, and they can sit there and make $1 million more. If there's no enforcement, get them off the books.
Yeah, no, I agree. So the employment verification, it goes back to the benefits. If you can come illegally and end up getting a job, that's an enticement for people to come. And so in Florida, I think Chip mentioned, we did E-Verify. So they have to run people through E-Verify. And if they're legal, obviously they can work. And it's always been the law in Florida that you have to be legal to work, but it's all about the enforcement. And it's illegal in the United States to work if you're illegally, and yet they don't enforce. So we did the E-Verify, and you're already seeing results from that, where people are not coming to Florida illegally because they know that if they're run through E-Verify, they're not going to be able to be hired. So we're moving very quickly now to a legal workforce. And I think that that's what we need, a legal workforce. And guess what? Most of the people coming illegally, they're going to be willing to work for much lower wages than the average American's going to be able to work for. So you end up depressing wages of working class people who are either legal immigrants or who are American citizens. How is that a good thing? I want higher wages for people. I think we're better off when we have higher wages for people. Yes, sir.
Dwayne King, we ranch down here just north of Eagle Pass. All of us are here because of the concern on the border. And we all know that 90% of this problem is the cartels. And the cartels control Mexico. So in your administration, how would you control the cartels in Mexico?
We will. It's a great question, and it was good to talk to you all before this about the people on your property and knocking on your windows. I mean, like, it's probably not as a big a deal for folks in this community because you guys know this is happening. But if you go to other communities throughout this country and don't see that and say, how would you feel if 15 people came in the middle of the night, started knocking on your windows? I don't think very American citizens would sign up for that. I guarantee you. And so it's a huge problem. And the fact that that type of invasive activity is happening just shows we need to take strong action. So we will use every bit of leverage at our disposal against both Mexico and every power at our disposal against the cartels. I think there's a lot of leverage we have over Mexico that a lot of presidents have not been willing to use. I think that they think that somehow that will be bad politically. I don't think so at all. I think you've got to do it. And just think about it. How many of these folks are coming all the way through Mexico to get to the southern border? Mexico's not doing what they need to be doing. You know, this is something that they're working effectively with the cartels to allow happening, and it's totally unacceptable. So we've got a lot of levers at our disposal. We will pull those levers and exercise leverage to ensure better behavior, and we will also use the authority We do transnational criminal, we call the cartels. If we do foreign terrorist, we're going to do a designation that's going to pack a punch. And here's the thing. For the president to battle against the cartels, you don't even need to necessarily do that. You don't even necessarily need Congress. If they are trying to move product into this country and they are killing our people, you don't only have, you have the right, you have a responsibility to fight back, and we will. Yes. Air Force? All right.
Got you, sir. Governor.
You know, my wife's sister, she did her Air Force pilot training in Del Rio, Texas. And so my wife actually knew Del Rio before we even met. It's ironic. And then, like, you know, years later, I'm deploying Florida troops to help out.
Governor, just so you know, this is going to be the last crowd question.
Okay.
Yes, Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, has been renamed to honor the first Hispanic general, four-star general, Cavazos. Now, I've heard that you are going to be changing some names to some of these forts. Will you, as the new president, will you change the name back to Fort Hood?
So I haven't seen what happened with Fort Hood, but here's what I said with respect to Fort Bragg, is that's an iconic base in this country. I didn't even know it was a Civil War general. I don't think most people knew it was a Civil War general. You just know you've been to Bragg, right? And they're changing it for political correctness reasons. And so I don't believe in doing it for political correctness reasons. And that's just kind of how we're going to roll on it. And here's the thing. You know, you learn from history. You don't erase the history. I mean, it is what it is, and I think that that's a much better way. But I think what's happened is there's been a movement to say, oh, well, we really, these Civil War people are just so bad. But then they'll take Abraham Lincoln off the statue down in Boston, took him down. They'll take Teddy Roosevelt down in New York City. They'll remove George Washington's name from schools in San Francisco. And that's not, I think, what I want to see. I mean, I think you can look back at anybody and you could find flaws, but at the end of the day, you know, we had people that have done great things for this country. We wouldn't be where we were unless we've had some of the people like Washington and Thomas Jefferson and these people. So I don't want to erase that. I'm not in a position to say that somehow I'm so much better than any of this. It's a different time. People make mistakes. There's different parts of our society we look back and can say was a mistake. But this idea that we're going to erase history, I just think is fundamentally wrong, and we're not going to do that. All right, well, we are going to go. Thank you all for coming. We are going to go and we're going to do a press conference. We're going to announce some specifics on this border policy. I kind of outlined some stuff, but there's even more good stuff there. So we'll lay that marker in the ground. And here's what I'll say. We don't just do this to get your vote. We don't just do this so that we get a good news cycle out of it. We do it because we intend to follow through and actually produce the results. No excuses. We will get it done. God bless you all. Thank you.